I am Mara Ellington, 31 years old, a nurse at Briarwood Community Clinic in Savannah, Georgia. I save strangers every day. But that night, no one saved my son. I stood in my small apartment, holding a stack of medical bills. My father looked at me, his voice cold as steel. We don't print money. Mara, you have to be realistic. Behind him, my mother lowered her head, silent as if none of this concerned her. All I asked for was $85,000, just enough to save Noah's life. My son was only 8 years old. With every beep of the ventilator, I prayed they would change their minds. But they turned away, and the door closed. The room fell so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat breaking. People say family is the place that always welcomes you home. I just wish they hadn't locked the door while I was knocking. I looked down at the nurse badge on my white coat, then at the photo of Noah smiling by Tybee Lake. I save others every day, but tonight, I was powerless. What they didn't know was, I never forget those who turned their backs on my child. Before I go on, tell me, where are you watching from? Have you ever had to choose between your family and the child you love most? If this story tightens your heart, hit like and subscribe to the channel. You won't believe what happens next. I have never told this story to anyone until today, because if you've ever had to stand strong alone to protect your child, you'll understand. That night, I thought I had already heard the worst. I was wrong. When the phone rang, I already knew what I was about to hear. Doctor. Patel's voice trembled slightly on the other end of the line. Mara, Noah's condition is getting worse. You should come right away. I don't remember what I was wearing when I rushed out of the house. Only the sound of rain slamming against the car window, and the faint smell of disinfectant still clinging to my nurse's uniform. Red lights followed one after another, and I didn't stop at any intersection. If the emergency doors had opened just 1 minute later, everything could have been different. I signed my name at the reception desk while the coordinator asked, "Is your insurance still active? This procedure will incur out-of-pocket costs." I nodded, unable to speak. My signature shook so much, it looked like it belonged to a stranger. In my head, my father's voice echoed, "You have to be realistic." But what is reality when every beat of your child's heart has a dollar value attached to it, doctor? Patel pulled me into the hallway. "We can attempt a support protocol. It's high risk and expensive. If we don't act now, the intervention window will close." I asked quietly, "How much?" Hard to say, but definitely tens of thousands, maybe more. If I didn't decide now, I would lose my son. If I did, I would lose everything else I had left. I looked at Noah through the glass wall. He was surrounded by tubes, his tiny face pale and fragile. He opened his eyes for a moment, trying to smile. "Mom, I'm okay." "Yeah, you're okay," I whispered, lying to both of us. When they rolled his bed away, I called my father. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. I left one message. My voice calm, terrifyingly calm. "I don't need your money anymore. I just need you to say goodbye to Noah." No one called back. I sat in the waiting room, the fluorescent lights washing over sterile white walls. Across the hall, another mother was being held by her husband. She cried. I couldn't. I just stared at the screen flashing above the counter. Estimated total $92,000. If I signed one more line, my future would shatter. But if I didn't, my son might not survive the night. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed. The ink bled across the paper like an open wound, and in that moment, I felt as if I had sold what was left of myself. When the paperwork was done, I sat silently, watching the ink dry on the form. I wondered, can faith buy time? Because I had just wagered everything on a miracle that no insurance would cover. A sharp pain struck my chest as I remembered Noah's birthday last year. He had asked, "Mom." "I will. Grandma and Grandpa come." I lied. They're busy. But they'll call. They didn't call. And today, they still haven't. I leaned my head against the wall, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor from the operating room. In that silence, I prayed not for a miracle, but for endurance. If anyone's listening, please, don't take him away. Then an alarm pierced the hallway. Unanswered bust. Shouting code blue operating room 3 doctor. Patel appeared at the end of the corridor, his face pale. Mara, we need a decision now. The window is closing. I stood up, my legs numb. There was no time left to think, only to believe. Believe that if I had already lost too much, God would at least let me keep one thing. I walked toward the heavy metal doors. The surgical light leaked through the gap, cold and blinding. I pressed my hand to my chest, or feeling my heart beat fast, uneven, terrified. You have to fight. Noah, I whispered. Mom's right here. Inside. The heart monitor quickened, then suddenly flatlined. The silence that followed was suffocating. That night, amid the rain and the flashing red of alarm lights, I realized sometimes a single phone call doesn't just change everything. It takes away everything you ever believed would stay forever. I grew up in Savannah. In a red brick house with a white fence and a lawn, my mother insisted we keep perfect. Caroline, my younger sister, was the family's pride, golden hair, a sweet singing voice, and eyes that smiled. And me, I was quieter. I liked books and helping others, and I was usually the one clearing the table after dinner. I remember the parent-teacher meeting in 8th grade. The teacher said, "Mara is so kind, always helping her classmates." Mom smiled. But as soon as we left the school, she whispered to me, "Kindness is nice, but you need to be more practical. That kind of personality doesn't pay the bills." I was 13, and that was the first time I understood that in my family, kindness only mattered if it looked expensive. From a young age, I learned that in our house, some doors only opened for one person. Caroline went to the state university to study marketing. Attending business conferences with our father, I enrolled in community nursing school. Dad couldn't hide his disappointment. He said it bluntly over dinner. "You could do more than just take care of other people. Be practical." "Mara," I replied. "Someone has to take care of other people." "Dad." He set down his fork and knife. The silence so heavy, I could hear the ticking clock on the wall. Mom sighed and changed the subject to how Caroline had been invited to an internship in New York. That same year, I was a trainee nurse in the emergency room. On my first day, I bandaged a little boy who had fallen off his bike. He looked at me and said, "You remind me of my mom." I laughed. Maybe that was the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I save strangers every day. But in my parents' eyes, my hands were always too rough to be called successful. Caroline shone at every occasion: her friends' weddings, charity parties, and the Briarwood fundraising gala where my father sat proudly in the front row. And me. On those same nights, I was doing night shifts surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the wail of ambulance sirens. Once, I stopped by home to grab some paperwork. The whole family was taking pictures by the gate, flashing lights. Silk dresses. Perfect laughter. Mom saw me and flinched. "You came at this hour. We're about to head to the event." I nodded, clutching the patient files to my chest. I just forgot a prescription form. No one asked anything else. They turned back to their perfect smiles. On the drive back, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, creased uniform. Dark circles under my eyes. A world away from theirs. That night I made myself a promise one day. I wouldn't need an invitation to walk into any room. Noah was born on a summer morning, in a small 3rd-floor apartment without an elevator. When the doctor laid him on my chest, every practical word I'd ever heard vanished. Dad didn't visit. Mom came twice, the first time with flowers, the second with advice. You should think long term. Raising a child alone will be exhausting. I just smiled, because when I looked into Noah's eyes, I didn't feel tired. I felt afraid. Afraid of not being enough. 3 months later, Noah was hospitalized for the first time with a congenital heart defect. I called Mom just to hear her voice. She answered softly, as if discussing the weather. The hospital will handle it. Don't panic. Be practical. I hung up, wondering what does practical mean. When your 8-month-old is learning to breathe through a plastic tube, they said I was too emotional. But no one ever told me how much one breath costs. Every year, the Briarwood Foundation hosts a gala at a riverside hotel. I attended last year not as a guest, but as a nurse on the emergency standby team. While passing the logistics area, I overheard 2 staff members whispering, "This invoice is from Havenwell Consultants again. That name sounds familiar." Yeah, I think it's one of Caroline's husband's companies. I froze. Havenwell. I'd seen that name on several Briarwood Foundation expense reports I'd accidentally come across in my father's office. The sums moving through there weren't small. As I turned away, golden light from the gala spilled across Caroline's satin gown. She raised her champagne glass, glowing under the music and praises for the Ellington family's generous hearts. A fund ledger isn't a prayer book. It has inflows and outflows. And someone was rewriting both. White light still poured across the hospital floor. He sat still, holding a cup of cold coffee. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom's sweetheart. "Don't forget Caroline's rehearsal dinner this weekend. Wear something bright. Don't be late." I stared at the screen but didn't reply. Somewhere in the hospital, Noah's heart monitor beeped steadily. In Savannah, they were toasting with champagne, and I was sitting there, counting every heartbeat, praying my son could take one more breath. The operating room door burst open. Dr. Patel stepped out, removing his glasses, his eyes avoiding mine. No one needed to say a word I already knew. "Mara," he whispered. That single sound was enough to silence the world. In that moment, I understood there are years they never saw, but those years are the ones that will change everything. The heart monitor went flat, leaving only the sound of rain against the window. Dr. Patel bowed his head, his voice barely more than a breath. "We did everything we could." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood still. My hands clenched so tightly the skin turned white. Perhaps when pain grows beyond what the body can hold, it can no longer find a way out. I looked at the white curtains swaying gently and saw my child lying there small, still, as if he were only asleep. When the last sound faded, I finally understood what true silence was. Dr. Patel placed a hand on my shoulder. "You can go in. Stay as long as you need." The room was cold, the dim light reflecting off the white-tiled wall. I sat beside the bed, touched, Noah's soft hair still faintly warm, the scent of baby soap, the one I always used, lingered in the air. "Do you remember Tybee Lake?" I whispered. "We promised we'd go back when you got better." I smiled a smile that broke halfway. "Maybe I'll still take you there." "Noah. Someday." I kissed his forehead, then stood up slowly. Every step away from that bed felt like leaving a piece of my own body behind. I said goodbye while secretly hoping someone would answer. A young nurse handed me a clear plastic bag, a small toy dinosaur, a tiny t-shirt, and a hospital wristband. Her voice was soft. "We're so sorry. Ms. Ellington." I nodded. I couldn't speak. I signed a few papers, administrative forms with the cold heading "Deceased Noah Ellington. Age 7. Each capital letter is cut like a blade. I folded the bag and held it against my chest. It was impossibly light. Everything that remained of a child could fit inside one small bag. Outside, a rain poured down. Headlights reflected across the wet pavement, turning into trembling streaks of light. I drove slowly, my hands still shaking. The traffic light ahead turned red. At the corner stood a new billboard, the Grant Wedding Love Deserves Celebration. I let out a hollow laugh. Love deserves celebration. The slogan echoed in my head between the sound of the wipers and the rain hammering the glass. When I reached my apartment, I stopped at the door. The keys slipped from my hand. For a few seconds, I couldn't open it, as if the house itself knew there was no one left for me to return to. Inside, everything was the same. The small blanket on the couch, the unfinished Lego set on the table. Only one thing was missing: the laughter and the little voice saying, "Mom, look." The room was unchanged, just missing the one person who made it home. I turned on the kitchen light. The old yellow glow Noah once said was warm like honey. I washed his ceramic cup with the rocket ship on it. My hand froze under the running water. I dried it and set it back in its place. I folded his little shirts one by one, then packed them neatly into a box. I found his half-burned birthday candle, still crusted with a bit of frosting. I placed it on the table. Unlit, just sat there, watching as the moonlight crept across the wall. I learned how to tidy up without erasing. Hillview Cemetery sat on a hill, the air filled with the scent of grass and damp earth. The service was brief. The pastor read a passage. His deep, steady voice like distant rain. 3 of my colleagues came, carrying white chrysanthemums. My parents arrived late. Mom wore a simple black dress, her face perfectly composed. Dad stood behind her, silent. They laid down flowers and said a few words about God's will. I didn't respond. I just watched the dirt fall, one handful at a time. A colleague touched my shoulder, a simple gesture, yet more genuine than any word. Strangers stood by me longer than the people who shared my last name. That afternoon, I returned to the apartment. The doctor's appointment note for Noah's heart checkup was still pinned to the wall. I sat down, my fingers brushing over the leather notebook Noah used to doodle in. On the first page was a messy drawing of 2 people, me and him, standing under the sun. I picked up a pen, opened to a new page, and wrote the first 2 words, "Dear Dad." I wrote those 2 words and stopped. The ink spread across the page like diluted blood. I had never called him Dad except on rushed Father's Day cards when I was little. But tonight, in this empty apartment, I wrote to him as if he could hear me. "Dear Dad, you taught me that feelings don't pay bills. You said, be practical. And I tried until there was nothing left to be practical about." I paused, watching the ink dry. In the silence, I could hear his voice again, crisp and rehearsed, like a memorized speech. "Don't be dramatic. Mara, control your tone." I had lived my entire life like a performance graded for composure. Careful, polished, never let a tear fall out of place. You taught me silence, and now I understand why I stayed silent for so long. I remembered the night I was 12, standing behind the attic railing, looking down at the Briarwood fundraising gala. He spoke to donors, glass of wine in hand, voice booming. "Every dollar goes to those who need it most." I remembered the white envelopes, the golden lights, and my mother's laughter, the kind she reserved only for people with money. After the party, I saw him counting donations in his office, bill by bill, stack by stack, carefully noting amounts in a brown leather ledger. When I asked, "Dad, do we give all of it to the poor?" he smiled. "Silly girl. We have to keep some for operations. Nothing comes for free." I didn't understand what operations meant then. Now I do. His generosity always came with a receipt. "Dear Dad." I thought about Noah's funeral. You stood there, dignified, telling everyone, God has his own plan. Maybe that's true, but every plan serves the living. Doesn't it? I remembered my mother's hand clutching his Brefton, her small smile holding steady for the local news cameras. They called him a pillar of the community. I wanted to scream that the pillar was built from other people's money and his daughter's tears. I didn't scream. I just wrote. And for the first time, every word I wrote wasn't an apology. I continued in the letter. I know why you didn't cry. Because tears don't photograph well. But I'm different. I have nothing left to lose. Not even an image. I folded the letter halfway. Then opened it again. I couldn't stop, because in every line of ink lived the rage I had never allowed myself to admit. Maybe God isn't cruel. People are. Night had deepened. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and then pulled it back out. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, an apology, or simply the feeling of being heard. I almost tore it up but stopped when an old folder fell from the drawer. On the cover, the Briarwood Foundation logo. My father's handwriting was scrawled across it. Confidential. Vendor list. 2021. Inside were faded invoices, 6-figure amounts. One name appeared over and over: Havenwell Consultants. I frowned. I'd heard that name at the gala, the two staff whispering that Havenwell belonged to Caroline's husband. I flipped through each page, every number pounding like a weak heartbeat in my chest. Dear Dad, you always said money is just a tool to do good, but if that good pays your own family, is it still good? I placed the letter beside the folder, the desk lamp's glow reflecting off both. They sat together like two sides of the same story, a story I could no longer stay silent about. I thought I was writing to end something. Turns out, I was only beginning. I didn't send the letter. I tucked it in the drawer, right beneath the Briarwood folder. Outside, rain began to fall. Each drop against the window sounded like a heartbeat, someone's heartbeat coming back to life inside me. I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar, Havenwell Consultants LLC, Georgia. The first page showed a short listing: office address, business license, registered agent Caroline Ellington Grant. Dear Dad. I added one final line. Your foundation ledger doesn't just hold money. It holds evidence. I didn't tremble. I simply smiled, for the first time since Noah's death. I could hear my own heartbeat again, not out of fear, but for justice. That morning in Savannah, the rain was as fine as silver threads. I stood before the Briarwood Foundation, building the place where my father was still praised for his contributions to the community. The brass sign gleamed, the glass doors spotless enough to reflect my own face, the face of someone who once believed the kindness here was real. I carried my medical staff ID. I'm a nurse who used to assist with the screening program. I'm here to update some records. The receptionist smiled, unsuspecting. The records room's down the hall, next to the copier. I walked through the long corridor, fluorescent lights casting cold reflections on the polished floor. Everything looked too neat, too sterilized, like even the mistakes had been scrubbed until they shone. I used to think Briarwood was a place that saved lives. Today, it was a crime scene. The records room looked harmless: files, binders, and a still-warm photocopier humming quietly. I put on my medical gloves and opened the drawer labeled Accounts Payable. Thick binders by quarter Q, 3FY2021, Q4FY2021, Q1FY2022. The name Havenwell Consultants LLC appeared again and again every month. Category: Program Strategy, Outreach, Donor Engagement. I read the numbers: 18,000, 24,000, and 31,000. Each one steady as a heartbeat, the heartbeat of a body built on hypocrisy. Then I stopped at the winter gala budget. Line item: Vendor Coordination, Havenwell, $27,000. $27,000 for vendor coordination at a charity gala. My throat went dry. In this city, a pediatric heart surgery costs about $35. Every donation is a stain washed clean with goodness. I turned to the bank file for December, the month Noah died. The line cut through me like a blade. ACH transfer to Havenwell Consultants LLC, $42,500. Timestamp Friday. 3/1, 4 p.m. The same day I buried my son. He sank into a chair, the statement trembling in my hands. Note: final deliverable before year end. Per chair approval. The signature beneath it are Ellington. That familiar handwriting, the same one on every Christmas card. My father's. An attached email read, "Will align with Briarwood's storytelling needs for donor retention. Thanks. Dad. Sender Caroline at Havenwell Consulting. Come, my sister." I switched on the copier. Light swept across each page, white beams slicing through paper like surgical knives, exposing every lie already printed in ink. When they buried my son, they buried the evidence too. Then came his voice behind me, low. "Cold Mara." I turned. My father, Richard Ellington, stood in the doorway, navy suit, wine-red tie, carrying the self-assurance of a man used to owning every room. "What are you doing here, volunteering?" I said flatly. "Updating public health files." His eyes narrowed when he saw the Havenwell folder. "That's not your concern. Everything that carries the Ellington name used to be my concern," I replied. The air in the room grew heavy as stone. "You don't understand," he said. "Every foundation has operating expenses. Havenwell provide legitimate services." I tilted my head slightly. "Fascinating. Call it operating expenses. And suddenly every sin sounds clean." He tightened his grip on his leather briefcase. "Don't bring your emotions into this." "Emotions," I pointed at the statement. "You authorized a transfer to Havenwell on the same day my son was buried. Call it whatever you want." "Dad." "But to me, that's choosing money over blood. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs someone brave enough to read it out loud." His voice dropped. "Measured and dangerous. You have no idea what you're poking at." "Mara." "Yes, I do," I said calmly. "The truth." He looked at me, his eyes a storm of fear and fury. "You're threatening this family's reputation." I shrugged. "Reputation almost as expensive as a life." "What do you want?" he demanded. "I want you to do the right thing. At least once in your life." I pulled out a handwritten note and placed it on the desk. "Freeze the Havenwell contract. Initiate an independent audit. Return the funds to the patient relief program." He stared down at the paper, then up again, voice rasping. "You're blackmailing me with morality." I folded the note and slipped it into my bag. "No, I'm reclaiming the justice you owe, Noah." Silence. The rain outside merged with the soft click of the copier as it stopped. He stepped closer, his voice now a whisper, almost a curse. "You have no idea what you're stirring up. There are people who won't let this go." I slung the bag over my shoulder. "Good. Then you finally admit the truth has power." I walked down the hallway, the smell of coffee blending with fresh toner. Behind me, his voice echoed, low and tired. "You're going to destroy this family." I stopped at the door. "Family," I turned, my voice steady but sharp. "Family is when a child needs to breathe, and someone says yes. You said no." I opened the door. Light spilled in. The rain kept falling, washing the dirt off the brass plaque that read, "Serving the community. Since 1987, his hoarse voice followed one last time. You don't know what you're messing with." "Mara." I didn't look back. "No." "Dad," I said. "You're the one who doesn't know who you just woke up." That Monday morning, I woke to the endless vibration of my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications. Local news headlines flashed scandal at Briarwood Foundation charity front accused of money laundering. The foundation's logo filled the TV screen, a caption scrolling slowly beneath Chairman Richard Ellington under investigation. My father's face appeared stern, composed, and cold as a photograph on the cover of a magazine. Below it was an image of leaked documents, bank statements, Havenwell invoices, and his signature. A highlighted line read, "Per chair approval, $42,500. I sat upright. Everything had started in that copy room last week, and now it was national news. This story was no longer mine alone. Savannah was burning. On social media, number Briarwood Gate climbed to the top 3 national trends. Major donors demanded refunds. Another article revealed that Havenwell was run by Caroline Grant, daughter of the chairman. I scrolled through the comments. They stole from sick kids. Fake virtue always gets exposed. No one trusts charities anymore. The country club my parents frequented closed for internal reasons. The church stopped accepting donations from Briarwood. One comment blazed brighter than the rest. Whoever leaked this deserves a medal. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to read more. I didn't regret what I'd done. But every word felt like a stone shattering the glass of my own house. Reputation costs more than money, and it was on fire. That afternoon, I was summoned to the clinic director's office. Mrs. Jenkins sat upright, her tone gentle but cold. Mara, I have to ask, are you involved in the Briarwood document leak? Not directly, I said, but I believe in transparency. That foundation once partnered with us. She sighed. The city's putting pressure on us. They want to suspend you pending the investigation. I nodded. I understand. As I left the office, co-workers stepped aside. Some whispered, "Stay strong." At home, I opened my laptop. My inbox overflowed with messages. Thank you for speaking the truth. But among the praise were daggers. You betrayed your own father. I leaned back against the wall. Eyes closed. No one tells you the truth comes with a bill. The truth has a price, and this time, my name's on the invoice. 3 days later, my phone rang near midnight. Caroline's voice trembled on the line. Mara, they're shutting down Havenwell. Reporters are camped outside. He wants a divorce. My son, everything's falling apart. I stayed silent. She gasped, her words breaking. Please, say something. You've won. Haven't you? Just stop this. I'll return everything. I looked out the window, Savannah rain falling heavy and slow. I didn't win. Caroline, I said quietly, no one wins in this. It's just that now, the truth has a microphone. I'm scared. Mara, you should have been scared before you signed your name. I hung up, leaving her shaky breath echoing in my mind like air leaking from a balloon. Useless, but still loud. No one puts out a fire with gasoline. The following week, Briarwood held an emergency press conference. 3 people sat behind a long table. My father in the center. Behind them, the foundation logo was replaced by a plain white banner reading "Commitment to Transparency." He read the statement aloud. We apologize to the community. An independent audit will be conducted. I am temporarily stepping down as chairman during the investigation. Reporters erupted. Flashbulbs firing like lightning. That evening, I received an email from legal at Briarwood Foundation. .org. Cease and desist. Stop disclosing any further information, or we will pursue legal action. I read it through and deleted it. But an hour later, the doorbell rang. A courier stood at my doorstep, handing me a gold envelope sealed with the emblem of the U.S. District Court, Northern District of Georgia. I opened it. Subpoena. A federal grand jury summons. The first line read, "You are required to appear and testify in the case of United States v. Briarwood Foundation." I looked up through the window. The city glowed under the cold shimmer of night. They wanted me silent. I whispered, "But now, America wants to hear me speak." 2 weeks after the Briarwood scandal broke, Savannah returned to its slow, familiar rhythm. The protest posters were gone, replaced by fallen leaves and the long stretch of autumn sunlight across the sidewalks. I switched my phone to silent, made a cup of coffee, and opened the window. The air still carried the damp scent of last night's rain. No reporters outside. No more threats in the mailbox. I didn't turn on the TV, just listened to sparrows quarreling under the eaves. Peace, I realized, doesn't come after the storm. It comes when you stop looking back at it. Peace isn't silence. It's finally having room to breathe. On Saturday, I volunteered at the Riverdale Community Clinic. No cameras. No nameplates. Just a small brick building where workers lined up for free checkups. A curly-haired little girl handed me a stethoscope. "Ma'am." My heart's beating too fast. I smiled. That means it's still strong. Halfway through the shift, the head nurse brought me an envelope. No return address. Just a single line, written neatly across the front. "Thank you for opening a door." Inside was a hand-drawn postcard of a small heart. I tucked it into my coat pocket, feeling as though someone had quietly set one missing brick back into place inside me, among hundreds of numbers. I could finally hear a heartbeat again. Sunday evening. I came home to find a white envelope slid under the door. The postmark read Asheville, North Carolina. Inside was a handwritten letter in blue ink. "Dear Mara, my son was born with a heart defect. Thanks to the new Patient Relief Fund, we received financial support for his surgery. He's recovering well now. The doctor says his heartbeat is steady and strong. Today he asked me, 'Mom, who's Noah?' I told him. 'He's a boy who helped you live.'" I read the letter again and again. A tear fell onto the last line, smudging the word. "Thank you." I folded it carefully and set it by the window, where the breeze carried in the scent of the sea. Turns out, goodness only needs one honest voice to find its way in the right direction. The next morning, I drove to Hillview Cemetery. Freshly cut grass. White headstones aligned neatly under the sun. I brought the letter from Asheville and laid it on Noah's grave. The inscription was still clear, "Loved beyond measure." I told him about the little boy, about the strangers who were living now because of his name. The wind stirred the pines, carrying a faint scent of sap. Like a quiet reply. I didn't cry. I just stood still, letting my heart complete one whole, peaceful beat. My phone buzzed. A new email from the office of the U.S. Attorney. Your testimony has been confirmed. Hearing scheduled 9:00 a.m. next Monday. I looked down at the grave and whispered, "We're almost done." Noah, I'm no longer afraid of microphones. Morning at Tybee Island was soft as breath. I walked barefoot on the wet sand, holding a small folded note. On it are 4 handwritten words, "For past me." I tucked it into my wallet, like a promise. Then I turned back, dressed in a white blouse, and walked into the federal courthouse on Liberty Street. No cameras. No flash. Just a long corridor and pale morning light spilling through the windows. The bailiff opened the door and called out Mara Ellington. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. This isn't a trial for the past, I whispered to myself. It's a trial for silence. The federal courtroom that morning was so quiet I could hear every page turn, every tick of the clock on the wall. No cameras. No flashes, just me. 12 jurors. And the oath I was about to take. I will tell the truth. Not because I'm braver than anyone else, but because I've already paid the price for silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. I thought of Noah, of every heartbeat I once fought to keep alive. Silence is the inheritance I refuse to accept. I spoke briefly about the women in my family, strong, enduring masters of silence. My grandmother used to say, "Sometimes silence keeps the peace. But what kind of peace is worth keeping if it buries a child?" I said it plainly. You can't heal what you keep hidden. People in the courtroom bowed their heads, not out of pity, but understanding. Justice begins when one person dares to name what's right. When I left the courtroom, I no longer felt like a victim. I was a witness not only for Noah, but for thousands of forgotten children, facing the television cameras in the hallway. I spoke calmly. If you've ever been told to stay silent to keep the peace, speak. Not to seek revenge, but to save someone like Noah. Somewhere. I knew. Another mother was listening. When one mother speaks, 1,000 children are heard. Peace doesn't come from closing a story. It comes from opening new doors. So I left 3 invitations. Share this story with someone who needs to hear what's right. Comment your city and what you hope to change in your community. Support transparent organizations that help children and vulnerable patients where you live. Not everyone can save a life, but everyone can choose not to turn away. The truth needs a roadmap, not just emotion. That evening, I returned to Tybee Beach. The waves echoed like Noah's heartbeat. Blending into the night air, I whispered, "Son, he kept my promise. If you've ever had to stay silent just to survive, today, you can choose to speak." And finally, to live. As the dawn light touched the water, I smiled.